Welcome, Todd. Thank you very much for being here. It is a pleasure to have you here. Our topic today is the future is fractional and how to start a tech company as a non-technical founder. So I would like to, for you to introduce yourself, tell us about your story. What did you do and what lessons did you learn on this topic?
Well, thanks for having me, Mateo. I think I'm excited about the idea of fractional work because, I've been doing it myself now for the last about 2.5 years, and I'm just seeing more and more growth in this space. I'm seeing more people coming to me looking for fractional leaders, not just in engineering, but actually across business functions. And then I'm also seeing people coming to me who are wanting to be a fractional leader themselves. And so it's an interesting marketplace that's starting to emerge out of this. And so to give you some background on my story and how I came to this point, I was coming out of 8 years at one startup. I was the founding engineer at a company called Digit. And after having been there for about 8 years, I was ready for something new and just ready to sink my teeth into more variety. And so that's when I got into what I would call just startup consulting, giving high-level guidance to mostly non-technical founders. And what I found is they kept coming to me for the same things over and over, but I wasn't able to necessarily help them in the traditional way. And what I mean by that is, they had what I would say very basic questions about like, what tech stack should I consider using for my MVP? How do I build a team? What are some things to look out for if I'm building in a certain tech area? So these kind of like high level things that are not necessarily, it doesn't require a lot of custom brain work, which is is how I put it. What I mean by that is I'm making the same decision over and over. There's a set of best practices and directions to go in. And it doesn't require like full-time focus to have that guidance and provide that to a non-technical founder. And so what I realized is with fractional work, there's an ability to get a lot of leverage with our strategy and our leadership and let the execution be done by other folks on the team. And so it's a way of almost like productizing expertise and then spreading yourself across multiple companies at one time. That's the most common way to approach fractional leadership, specifically fractional CTO work. But the other kind of interesting fractional angle here is to actually take a vertical slice of a normal senior leader's roles and responsibilities. So like, let's say a traditional CTO at a company is responsible for the technical strategy, the people strategy, and maybe they only like one side of those more than the other. Maybe they really love the technical strategy, but don't like the people management side, or don't like the hiring and the recruiting and the people side of things. And so that's an opportunity for a fractional CTO to take a vertical slice of the responsibilities and actually come alongside an existing CTO and just take off the things from their plate that they don't want to do. And that allows that dedicated CTO to stay in their zone of genius and work on what they're best at and love to do. But the business is able to still solve the problems that need to be solved outside of that more narrow zone by bringing in a fractional CTO.
Got it. So a fractional CTO can really help both a non-technical founder that needs help on the technical side and also a very busy CTO that needs some help in one of the verticals that maybe they don't want to focus on, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And if we go back to the non-technical founder, and you've seen this a lot, and I see this as well, is, why do typically non-technical founders believe that they need a CTO as a partner, right? I mean, even myself, yeah. I work in a technology company, but my background is I'm an attorney, right? Yep. And whenever I thought in previous lives about creating a new company, I thought, I need a CTO to be a partner. I'm going to give this guy half the equity, whatever, right? So what is going on there?
Yeah, so I think earlier I mentioned kind of the traditional way, and up to this point, the more common way would be what you just said is the non-technical person comes up with an idea. Then they go out and try to find the technical co-founder who would be their counterpart to be able to actually execute that. And, you know, it comes from a place of them realizing that they don't have the expertise to fully do this themselves, which that's a good insight. Like they should listen to that instinct and know there needs to be some experienced perspective at the table when it comes to the technical side. But it's the how they go about filling that gap that needs to be re-examined. And that's what the fractional model can really work well at, is not necessarily having to find a full-on co-founder. And, you know, there's all kinds of statistics where the majority of co-founderships fall apart. You know, they often fail. It causes the company to fail oftentimes when the co-founder conflicts become too much for them to negotiate, and that can often kill the company. So you really have to think long and hard about, as a non-technical founder, like, do I need to give up half of the equity to get the technical guidance that I need? And usually in the earliest stage, you don't, as I was saying, you don't need like a full-time dedicated person to this, because the initial like high-level plan and decisions for like the technical direction, once that's set, it's just a matter of execution until you reach the next milestone of growth, that then maybe the strategy needs to shift. But that's not a full-time job oftentimes in the earliest stage. So this is an opportunity for the non-technical founder to get the same caliber of guidance and leadership, to know that the result is going to be the same. It's going to be a product that's on the right foot, using the right best practices, and set up for scale. But they don't necessarily have to go straight to like giving away half their equity and bringing that person in as a full-time co-founder. And the opposite side is true. It's very hard to recruit somebody to bet everything that they have going on professionally on one opportunity. And that's what the traditional way is doing, is you're basically saying like, you got to get somebody that is going to dedicate and go all in or nothing. And that's a hard thing to sell and to get buy-in on. And so this is a way to get the same result with much less friction, and I would say more speed, because you're going to be able to find someone a lot faster.
Thank you, Todd. Do you think sometimes investors put some pressure on the founders to have a technical person on the co-founders team?
Yeah, I think, you know, they always want to see some influence there. I think if they see a non-technical founder and it's the only founder, that's a huge red flag. And so they want to see that someone's involved. I mean, a lot of times founders will just go out and hire what they would call like a founding engineer. And so this would be someone who knows what they're doing, is very hands-on, but isn't necessarily a co-founder or a leader. And there's lots of startups that get funded on that. And so that is kind of a different flavor of what we're talking about, is just having someone who knows what they're doing involved in some way. And so it doesn't have to be so rigid as to say they have to be a co-founder.
Got it.
And they have to have, 50%.
And in your experience as a fractional CTO, you've seen that in practice, and would you say that you get kind of a seat at the table when you're talking to investors, and sometimes you help your clients do that?
Yeah, so I like to meet with the founders and get to know them as early as possible. Like I very much focus on the early stage startups, and so I love like pre-product, just idea phase, to get to know the founder, to understand like, could we potentially work together? How sound is the idea? How much does it resonate with me personally? And then if I vet that process and say like, yes, this is someone I want to work with, then actually come in as, on their pitch deck, as someone who's very involved as early as possible, as like an advisor or a fractional CTO. And then that gives some of the confidence to the investors, and gives the confidence to the founder, knowing that they have this person in their back pocket. And it's just a matter of getting funding to then unlock that. And so I like to get involved very early, even before the funding is locked down, to know that they have me when the time is right and when the funding has been secured.
Got it. A good question on what you were saying is, so what makes up a good founder candidate, right? So you work with founders all the time. You said you vet them, they go through a process. What are you looking for?
I'm looking for either a track record, or can I build enough conviction that I believe that they just need the opportunity, and it's just a matter of time that they will have the track record. So I'm looking for, yeah, either someone who is not a first-time founder. That's a lot easier to immediately kind of understand. They have the battle scars already from a lot of the hard lessons. They've gone through the trough of sorrow before, odds are, and they know how hard it can get when you're in the middle of things. But as far as someone who's like maybe a first-time founder, the things I'm looking for more than just the idea. I think a lot of times founders will think like the idea is the hard part. And just coming up with the idea, it's like, okay, cool. Like my job here is done. I've got the idea and I've got an initial team. They're going to run with it. And so that is something that when I see that, it worries me, because the idea is oftentimes actually one of the easier parts. It's actually like all the nitty gritty details in the execution and the little mini pivots that have to happen along the way as new information is learned. It just is getting started at the idea phase. And so I look for someone who I believe is going to understand that and be like excited by that challenge. And so that's usually something I can see like from their professional career. You know, this isn't just something cool they want to do, but something that they're really like deeply motivated, to the point where like it's not just a financial opportunity. It's like they feel that it's their duty to see this through and get it into the world. That sort of like core conviction is something that I look for.
Got it. And on the flip side, what do you think a non-technical co-founder should look for when they are hiring a fractional CTO? What makes up a good fractional CTO?
I think there's lots of different types of fractional CTOs, and so you definitely want to start with like, is it a match of the stage of company and the stage of the problems that the founder is facing? Does that align with the experience of the fractional CTO? So you wouldn't want to say, like, as a early stage startup founder, you wouldn't want to go out and find somebody that has only worked at big companies, because it's going to be a totally different set of problems that they have to face. And so if they haven't at least done some sort of fractional work or early stage work as an individual contributor at the earliest stage, they quite likely don't know what to expect. And so you always want to pair the stage. That's like the very first thing. After that, a lot of it comes down to personality and sort of like communication style. You know, like, is this somebody that you can see yourself working with, having candid, hard conversations with? There's a really cool worksheet that First Round Capital released, and it's called Co-Founder Dating. And it's like 50 questions that you could answer, you and your co-founder. And I'm not saying you necessarily need to go through all of these and exhaust the entire list, but there's an incredible set of questions on there that, by seeing both sides of the answers, you can start to see the differences and the alignments of what they value. So like, one founder might value, you know, what their personal paycheck is in the first year more than the other founder. They might be more focused on like, what is the upside that I can create long-term? They have different needs, different expectations. And so this is just like one example of a question that's in this sheet, but that is a great place to start as far as like, what are the questions to ask? And you can really just use your intuition to say, look at that list of questions and say, what are questions I'm drawn to? That means you're curious about and want to know what the other side thinks of it. That's a great question to ask. And then you start to get to know each other. But it really comes down to trust building, alignment in values. I mean, these are just kind of fundamental, like anything you'd look for in a a personal relationship partner or a business partner or someone you'd want to put on your team. A lot of the same heuristics and thought processes apply to this as well.
Are there any because even with partners, right? I'm thinking, and that brings up a very good. A friend of mine says, whenever you get a partner, you're getting a spouse. Each partner is a spouse, right? So that's the way you have to think about that long-term type of commitment. But I'm thinking sometimes different people complement each other. Does that happen with founders? How much of an alignment needs to exist, and how much of a richness can be found in the differences between the different founders? What's your take on that?
Great question. I think you do want to look at sort of the strengths and the weaknesses, or the gaps in the coverage, whichever terminology you like to use. But one of the things, the frameworks that we teach at my company, Tech Leaders, is the Genius Zone model. And this basically looks at 3 areas. There's other sorts of models out there that are kind of similar, but what we have is pretty unique in that it looks at a Venn diagram of three circles. And the 3 circles are worker, innovator, and manager. And the idea is you basically have these 3 hats that must be worn in any project. And there's some overlap there, but you want to make sure that between your founding team, you've got all 3 of those circles covered in some capacity. And so sometimes, we all have, I would say, our zone of genius, which is like what we love doing the most and is something that only we can do, or not as many people can do like we can do. Then there's a zone of excellence. This might be something that we're good at, but isn't necessarily something that we should be doing, because let's say anybody can do this. And so it's a good way to kind of take the skills of you and your co-founder and say, like, one of you might be more sort of visionary or innovative, the other might be more managerial. Well, we know for this project to go successful, we need both of those things in concert. And so if you find yourself in a situation where you're both visionaries, you're going to need to either find somebody to do the management, or it's going to be a problem. And so it's just about like getting candid and frank about these things, understanding where the gaps are, and then having a plan for the gap. In the case of Tech Leaders, my co-founder, we're both kind of similar on the like innovative kind of more vision side, but we needed management. And so Steven, my co-founder, stepped up to the plate to take on that role. Even though it's not necessarily his zone of genius, we recognize like this is the best way it'll work. We can't have it as a gap. Someone has to do it. And based on the other sorts of roles and responsibilities, it made sense to break it out. So he's filling that role right now. But one of the first sort of like next hires will be is someone who's focused exclusively on that, and that is their zone of genius. So it's really just about identifying these gaps, having a plan to fill them temporarily, knowing that there's a longer term plan that can be used when the time is right.
There's a lot of self-awareness as well in everything that you're describing, right? Because it's not only knowing the other person, but knowing more about yourself. And I guess you coach that as well with technical leaders. But what would you say, right? Do people tend to be self-aware, or to the contrary, do people tend to not know much about themselves?
Yeah, I'd say the trend is to not be as self-aware, but I think there's also like there's people that are, a lot of people are aware, but they're not necessarily going to be candid about that awareness. And what I mean by that is, on some level, they may know that they're not like the most detail oriented, or they may not enjoy project management or whatever it is. But when it comes to technical people specifically, we're sort of used to being the person with the answer and being the expert. And so with that comes oftentimes a limiting mindset of not wanting to be seen as not having the answer, or having a sort of a gap or a weakness. And so usually it's like the tech person, they know everything, like just go ask the tech person. And so when you have that sort of like culture and expectation, it can be very hard for people to say, I don't know, or that's not something I'm very good at. I'm going to need to spend some time to upskill in that way. These are things that they can be humbling for people who are not used to doing it or don't enjoy doing it. And so it's kind of these other sort of mindsets that actually prevent the candid discussion of the self-awareness, not necessarily that they're not self-aware altogether.
Is there anyone that we're talking about a lot of communication, soft skills, a lot about self-awareness, about a lot about personality and understanding and empathy about the other, right? And you coach a lot of people, right? You coach a lot of people from different backgrounds, from different personalities, etc. Is there anyone that cannot be coached, or do you see the potential in any technical people so that they can become a leader in their own sense and a fractional CTO? What's your take on that?
I think anybody can learn these things, especially when you look at the technical skills are highly detailed and trained. So like anybody who got to this point in their career had to upskill in a big way and learn lots of new things. And so the capacity exists. The only place I've seen it not work is if they don't have the desire, if they don't want to. So they need to be what I would call as coachable. And that just means open to the idea of getting better in a certain way, hearing other sides, even if sometimes I've had people where maybe their initial reaction to some feedback maybe is not as positive as they might like or I might like. But once they've had more time to digest it, think more deeply about it, they come around to it. And so that's someone that still is coachable, even if it's maybe a little bit hard or painful in the process. But it all starts from a desire to be open to it and to want that. And so I think that's the only time I've seen it not work is if somebody is like so sort of rigid in where they're at that they don't want to go to where they could be.
Do you stay in touch with some of the people that have gone through your course and you know, tell me about a feedback that made you proud, right? I mean, in my experience, right, mentoring and coaching, and I did this only as a manager, right? But one of the best feelings, in my personal opinion, is when you see them after a while, they are not doing anything with you, so they have no obligation, and they give you a good feedback, right? And that,
yeah,
it makes it all worth it, right? Do you have an
feels
experience
amazing.
of that?
Yeah, no. You know, some of my first coaching clients I'm still in contact with. This is years ago, even before we launched the Tech Leader program. I had a kind of a separate program where it was just one-on-one, and I love still catching up with those guys. They're still just doing incredible stuff, and it is so satisfying to see like that the lessons stuck, right? They didn't just like it didn't just go in one ear and out the other, but like they clearly internalized the things that they learned, and they're just capitalizing it even more than we initially thought. And so I love seeing that. And I think what we've actually seen since we started the Tech Leader program is most people continue on. They don't even necessarily want to stop. We're only a year into this, and the majority of people have just renewed into continuation because they find it's nice to have the support of a coach who's there when they face the new challenging things. Because like once they start down this path, it usually doesn't stop. Like there's more things to learn. There's more impact that can be made. You can continue to climb upwards and outwards, and there's just new situations that come up. And so it can be really helpful for people to have a place to go to ask questions that they don't have the answers to yet. And that just gives them even more confidence in their day-to-day, knowing like, I may not know the answer right now, but I'm going to go talk to the group after this, and I'm going to get actually maybe a couple of solution options. And that just helps them feel even more in control.
Do you have many leaders yourself in your life, right? Do you have an example of someone you remember fondly, like, I learned so much from this person? And when was that in your career? I'm taking you down memory lane, right? But
I've always kind of picked up, I've always been watching through my career, and I just pick things up from different people that I meet that I really admire and like how they do things. And so, you know, one that comes to mind would be the founder, original founder and CEO of Digit, the startup I mentioned earlier. His name's Ethan Block, and I was just always amazed by his ability to speak very transparently and casually to a large group of people. So I think it can be hard to be the head of a company and to bring bad news to a large group of people that are really looking up to you and depending on you. And so when you see someone navigate that challenging situation really gracefully, that stuck with me. And so seeing the way Ethan was always so transparent to everybody in the organization during the good and the bad, that creates such a loyalty and a trust from everyone, that like that stuff you can't really buy. It's something that only comes from action and the way you carry yourself. And so that's an example of a leadership trait that I really admire and still think about extensively to this day. I initially started working with him about 10 years ago. That's one. Another one would be a guy named Sean McCullough. He's now director of engineering at Atlassian, or head of engineering, something like that. I forget his exact title, but I worked with Sean at Groupon when we were replatforming their monolith after acquiring all the competitors. This was right around when they went public. And seeing his ability to be a leader without title was incredible. This is where I learned, like, you can have power and influence without title. And people that kind of lament the fact they don't have the title, they're really just using that as an excuse, because I've seen this firsthand, just how impactful an individual can be when they understand themselves, understand the situation, and understand the other side of the table. Because Sean was able to, in many cases, get buy-in from a stakeholder that didn't fully understand his perspective of the situation, but he was able to tie in and connect the importance of his perspective to what mattered most to the other person. And so seeing the way Sean did this within a fairly large organization, where he was really just a senior software engineer, was doing things on kind of a director of engineering level, I would say. It was just really inspiring and cool to see. So those are two examples of leaders that have really stuck with me over the years. And I consistently think about how they would approach things, and I tie that into my own leadership style.
That's beautiful. And it's nice to go back to those memories, right? And even when you're talking to new leaders, having them go back to that, right? When you're trying to explain the impact that you have as a leader, right? Yep. Reminds me of Spider-Man, right? With great power comes great responsibility. When you are leading people, you are making an impact. Your actions are creating emotions on their side, right? And they are watching you 24/7. So you can have a good impact or a bad impact, your choice. But that's happening every single day, right? And so
100%.
Thank you for sharing those memories. I like them very much.
What
is the toughest part of being a fractional CTO? What is the part that you think it's like?
I think context switching and being able to, push multiple balls forward at a time. I think that's a challenge that can be hard for people when they're first getting started here, is like giving. We all have a limited amount of attention. And so as soon as you have multiple responsibilities, you have to start thinking of how are you going to divide up that attention in a way that is going to serve all needs. And that doesn't necessarily mean equal attention, but having the discipline to know that your attention needs to shift to something else at a certain time. I think that is a common mistake that can really trip people up, is they may be used to focusing on just one thing, and they'll actually pay too much attention to that one thing, and they'll not be switching to the other thing that now it's time for that attention. So it's essentially, context switching 101, but can be harder because this is a kind of a newer way of doing things, and people aren't as used to this.
How many times, you may not know the answer to this, but how many times a day do you switch context?
It's different by the day, but my strategy is to time box things and say, I'm going to spend this amount of time on this, that amount of time on that, and then trust your plan. So I would say, a lot of times people will actually waste time because they're second guessing what they should do in that moment. And so it's almost like analysis paralysis. You're like, I have all this stuff to do. What should I do right now?
Yeah.
And so it's better to separate the planning from the actual execution, and then just trust the plan. And I think that's my strategy, is to lay out the day. I do weekly, monthly, and daily planning.
Okay.
I plan tomorrow today, so that way I know what tomorrow is, what I'm going to be doing tomorrow, so that when the time comes on my calendar, I just switch to the task. I just switch context instead of second guessing, should I be doing that task? And
Right.
that's where I'd say most people get tripped up on.
Do you use any specific tracking method, notebook, any system in particular that you
I've
love
tried so
most?
many different things. I love tools and trying new things. And so I've tried, initially I went down this path with like David Allen's Getting Things Done, GTD,
Mhm.
which is kind of almost like the Bible of productivity at this point. Got a lot of great ideas from there, but I've landed on today, I have a Notion setup that's pretty specific to how I like to work, but Notion becomes my second brain. Between Notion and Calendar, those are my main tools. I keep track and organized in Notion, but then Calendar is like my boss. I kind of like to think like I do whatever my calendar says. If it's not on my calendar, it's not going to get done. And so I treat that as the source of truth.
You teach a lot of fractional leaders on how to scale, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so is there a limit on that scalability? And I am asking in terms of how do you manage relationship with clients and how personal do you want that relationships to go, or really you can scale your team to whatever needed? What's your take on that?
It really comes down to how you like to work, what is the stage of company that you do, and then how do you want to scale? There are some fractional people that don't want the overhead of a team. They want to be solopreneurs. And that's a fine way to go about it, but it does have an upper limit to how many concurrent clients you can have. And so it really comes down to like, yeah, what is your model, whether it's solopreneur or team-based? What is the stage of company that you work with? And then how much you actually want to work? Because I think that's another cool thing about the fractional model is, maybe people want more flexibility, more time to do hobbies or spend time with family rather than just working more. And so that's something that fractional work can enable, is doing the same type of work, but in a less, in a limited way, to be able to do other things in life. And so this is very much a personal thing, as well as like how involved you get in with the individual clients. It is a very personal thing. And so it's hard to say what is right, but I can talk about the options and the different ways that can show up. And so that's one of the things that we help people think through when they're coming into the tech leader program. If they are going down the fractional CTO track, like what do they want their offer to be? Do they want to have calls, only do work on Zoom calls? Do they want to have no Zoom calls and only work over Slack? There's lots of leeway to set up their structure in a way that works best for them, because you can do things like being an advisor. You don't even necessarily have to be a hands-on fractional CTO. And so it really comes down to the personal preference at the end of the day.
Got it. Thank you. And if someone is trying to become a fractional CTO, what are some of the options and how do you help people become a fractional CTO?
Yeah. So, the obvious option is just to start doing it, figuring it out. That was basically what I did. So I know it's possible, but it took years to get to the point where I felt like I had something that was working in a way that worked for me, that I had that system in place. So you can certainly go out there and figure it out yourself. It is possible. It just takes time. The faster way is to actually model other people who are doing it already, that are doing exactly what you want to do, and surround yourself with people that are already fractional CTO. And so that's one of the things that we've created with the Tech Leader program, is a specific track for people that are going down the fractional CTO route, as opposed to being like a director of engineering at a bigger company. Like they're going entrepreneurial. And so having a group of people that are all thinking about the same thing, going through the same things at the same time, that's a huge benefit and a shortcut, cheat code to figuring this all out. The other thing that we do with the Tech Leader program is actually giving like the playbook of what I've arrived at, is like what works, what doesn't, what are some things to keep in mind, what are some things to try out for yourself. I give you the whole playbook that I've come up with after these years. And so part of that playbook is actually how you then come up with your own playbook for what works for you. So you get to see like the playbook that I've arrived at, but as I said before, so much of this stuff is personal. We show you how to write your own version of that playbook. And that playbook is what makes it easier to scale, easier to solve these problems, because you're not reinventing the wheel every single time. And then the last thing I would say that is one of the best like mental exercises to go through to get this figured out for yourself is to think about what was the most fun problem that you solved in your career, and who was that most valuable for. And so it might be literally a case of one, like there was one person that had this one problem and you liked solving it. But I think one of the things we teach in the program is how you can use digital marketing and online marketing to open up your market to more than just your personal network, to find dozens, hundreds, thousands of people that are just like that one case that you like to solve. And so I think a mistake with this kind of work is that you think that there's not enough people that have the problem that you like to solve. And so people don't specialize. But the more you specialize, the easier it is to sell and attract ideal opportunities. So I think it's useful to just look back, just reflect on your career and say, what problems did I love solving? It could have been like building an MVP, or it could have been migrating infrastructure to something new to hit a new scalability point, or building a team. Whatever the problem was that you love doing the most, there's a way to build a fractional business around just solving that problem for all the people that have that right now.
Very nice. Thank you, Todd. And if they want to contact you, is there any email they should be using, or where should they go?
Yeah, you can email me, Todd at technical-leaders.com, or if you go to the website, technical-leaders.com. I'm on Twitter at Remote Branch. I'm on LinkedIn, Remote Branch. Those are the main socials, but the website is also a good place to find out more information about this. And if you want to talk about this, you can book a call with me too, and I'm happy to help you figure this out for yourself.
Very nice, Todd. I appreciate it very much. This was a great conversation. As always, I enjoy talking to you, and I'm very happy that more people will be able to hear you. And thank you for being here with me, and we'll stay in touch.
Thank you, Mateo. Really appreciate you having me on today.